Man is born as an irrational animal. Civilization is a failed attempt to domesticate it. What if morality is nothing more than a game, that the strong dominate, the weak obey, and that justice is just a convenient illusion? Arthur Schopenhauer was not born a pessimist. He did not come into the world believing that life is a cruel farce. But throughout his life, he realized something disturbing. Men are not guided by reason, but by irrational and selfish impulses. And that is how his philosophy emerged, not from optimism, but from the brutality of truth. These ideas did not come ready-made. They were forged by experience, disappointment, and relentless observation of reality. In the beginning, his path was like that of many others, driven by ambition, curiosity, and an unshakable faith in reason. But by writing his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer had already transformed himself into a shadow philosopher, someone who uncovered the brutal, mechanical truth of existence. His conclusion was straightforward. Life is unfair. Power is not synonymous with virtue, and often those who triumph are not the best among us. His philosophy was not born from the comfort of academic isolation, but from the pain of seeing the world without illusions. His destiny seemed promising. His mother, Johanna Schopenhauer, was a renowned writer, and his father, a successful merchant, dreamed of him taking over the family business. However, from an early age, Schopenhauer realized that the world does not reward intelligence or justice, but rather cunning, influence, and brute force. His father, whom he admired, did not see life through the prism of idealism, but of relentless reality. He wrote, "The world is not rational, and men are not guided by reason." His father's death was shrouded in mystery, a possible suicide or an accident. His mother, Johanna Schopenhauer, already a famous and socially influential author, could not tolerate her son's critical and dark temperament. Over time, the relationship between the two became irreconcilable, culminating in a definitive breakup. When Schopenhauer published his masterpiece, he expected recognition, glory, and a place in history, but he was received with indifference. His book was released in the same period as the works of Hegel. A philosopher, he despised both for his ideas and his stance. For Schopenhauer, Hegel was the perfect portrait of intellectual fraud, someone whom the world insisted on rewarding not for the truth of his thought, but for his political skill and influence. Convinced of his philosophical superiority, Schopenhauer openly challenged Hegel. With arrogance and contempt, he decided to schedule his classes at the same time as his rival, certain that his idea would attract more students. But the reality was cruel. While Hegel gathered crowds, Schopenhauer's room remained empty. Hegel's success was not just due to the depth of his ideas, but to his ability to play the academic power game. Schopenhauer, on the other hand, refused to adopt this strategy and ended up relegated to obscurity. His work remained ignored for years. This ostracism not only affected his career, but definitively shaped his philosophical vision, reinforcing his belief that the world does not reward truth, but convenience. His greatest intellectual reward came from in-depth study of Eastern traditions, especially Buddhism and Hinduism, whose concepts decisively influenced his philosophy. Schopenhauer realized that the human essence is not guided by reason, but by instinct. We are not moralists in search of justice, but beings moved by a blind and irrational impulse, what he called the will to live. This primordial force is neither compassionate nor altruistic, but a voracious, relentless energy aimed at survival and domination. He wrote, "Man can do what he wants, but he cannot will what he wants." In doing so, he revealed the illusion of free will. Our choices are not truly conscious, but reflections of impulses and conditioning that operate beyond our control. In the game of power, It is not the most just who triumph, but those who do not carry the burden of conscience. The good hesitate, the merciless act. The good question themselves, the merciless impose their will. The good seek justice, the ruthless create the rules to ensure they always win. The will to live does not recognize morality, does not value compassion. It favors those who dominate, manipulate, and take what they want without remorse. The world, according to Schopenhauer, does not reward virtue, but rather the strength and cunning of those who understand the true nature of existence. But why does this cycle keep repeating itself? Because the will to live is not just blind, it is also cunning. It does not just manifest itself as brute force, but disguises itself, clothing the power of virtue, the greed of cooperation, and the oppression of necessity. Their greatest trick is to convince even the most ruthless that they are fair, that their rule is legitimate, and that their success is the result of merit, not manipulation. This is why the most cunning tyrants, corporate tycoons, and political despots see themselves not as villains, but as inevitable. But this illusion is not exclusive to the powerful. It is present in all of us. Schopenhauer viewed most human actions not as rational choices, but as reflections of primitive biological impulses. The desire to conquer, dominate, and accumulate is not born of logic, but of instincts disguised as ambition, triumph, and power. The will to live hides under ideologies. It makes us believe that our victories are moral, that our selfishness is legitimate, and that exploiting others is just the natural order of things. The game of life does not reward the noblest, but those who know how to transform their instincts into acceptable justifications. And this, perhaps, is humanity's greatest illusion. Therefore, history repeats itself. Those who achieve power are convinced that it was their destiny, while those who are dominated are led to accept their fate as inevitable. Schopenhauer saw human history as a cruel cycle, where the strong triumph, not because of merit or virtue, but because they are willing to do what the weak avoid. Still, he did not preach submission, nor did he encourage an unbridled quest for power. His warning was simple and direct. See the game for what it is. The world does not follow fair rules. He moves by will, force, and deception. If you don't understand this, you will always be manipulated by those who understand. It is not necessary to rely solely on Schopenhauer's words. History speaks for itself. Julius Caesar promised democracy, but disbanded the republic to reign unopposed. Napoleon extolled freedom, but made himself emperor, refusing to bend the knee. None of them was the fairest or the wisest, were the most strategic, audacious, and visionary. They did not see the world as it should be, but as it really was. The most disturbing aspect of reality is not that these men were ignored, but that they were celebrated. For power does not belong to the righteous, but to those who understand. But the truth is even darker. The problem is not just the rise of ruthless leaders, but the fact that society itself pushes them to the top. Reflect and question who writes history, who shapes the narratives that define our worldview. The victors, the rulers, those who deciphered the rules of the game and knew how to use them to their advantage. Caesar didn't just assume power, he made the people believe that it was their only salvation. Napoleon did not dominate France by force, but by charisma, propaganda, and fear, leading the people themselves to desire his government. A leader who conveys firmness, authority, and decision, even if corrupt, will always have followers. The explanation is straightforward. The appearance of power generates submission. Anyone who understands the human mind and knows how to manipulate fear, desire, and ambition can control crowds without resistance. Social psychology confirms this. People tend to follow those who demonstrate strength and security, regardless of their character. And here is the cruelest trap. Often, those who suffer under power are those who sustain it most. History repeats itself. The French didn't just accept Napoleon, they glorified him as a symbol of greatness and order. The Romans didn't just put up with Caesar, they extolled him as a savior. Even in modern times, crowds revere billionaires, corrupt politicians, and ruthless executives, not despite their power, but precisely because of it. Social psychology shows that many associate success with competence, confusing domination with greatness. This cognitive bias explains why those who accumulate wealth and influence are admired, regardless of the means they use to get there. And this is exactly why the game is structurally biased. It is not that morally upright people are incapable of ascending, but the system itself does not favor their ascension. History proves that power structures reward those who play by other rules, rules that prioritize strategic manipulation over ethics. Schopenhauer understood that power is not based on morality, but on perception. And the moment someone stops believing that justice will correct the world's inequalities, they begin to see the game of power more clearly. So what should we do with this knowledge? Schopenhauer did not promote the search for power or competition in the social game. His philosophy was focused on seeing reality as it is, without filters or illusions. A man becomes wise when he stops suffering for that which is beyond his control. For him, the only real way to escape this cruel cycle was to let go of it, abandon illusions, stop expecting justice from the world, and choose clarity over self-deception. Schopenhauer did not teach how to gain power, but how to be truly free, free from the illusions, expectations, and false promises that sustain the social order. Because by understanding the essence of the game, you become immune to manipulation. And those who cannot be controlled are the only ones who truly achieve freedom. In the preface to his classic work, The Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche wrote, "What if goodness in man were a vestige of decay? What if it represented a danger, a temptation, a poison, an intoxicant, causing the present to accommodate itself at the expense of the future? Safer, more comfortable, but also more mediocre and limited? What if morals were the barrier that prevents men from achieving all the greatness and power they could achieve? What if morals were, in fact, the greatest of dangers? Few question why certain values are considered good or bad. Instead, they absorb the moral judgments of their society almost automatically, without reflection. For the past 2 millennia, it is argued that the prevailing morality in the West has been an unnatural morality, a code that, in his words, opposes the vital instincts. But how did this unnatural morality, this poison infiltrated into the hearts of humanity, manage to dominate Western civilization? History reveals an unchanging pattern. Shrewd and strategic individuals rise to the top, while those who rigidly follow moral principles tend to fall behind. Understanding why evil thrives is not just useful, it is essential. To do this, it is essential to revisit Nietzsche, one of the most controversial and misinterpreted philosophers in history. From an early age, we learn a comfortable lesson: that good always conquers evil, that justice triumphs, that honesty, kindness, and righteousness inevitably lead to success. But does this narrative really reflect reality? It's a charming belief, but there's one problem. It's nothing more than a fairy tale. Nietzsche debunked this illusion and called it slave morality. Throughout history, power dynamics have been shaped by ideologies that limit force and discourage the assertion of will. An emblematic example was the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire. While Rome expanded its rule through war and cultural assimilation, Christianity brought an opposite paradigm: the valorization of humility, the exaltation of suffering, and the condemnation of power as corrupting. Over time, this new morality not only influenced the fall of the empire, but also profoundly reshaped Western thought. Nietzsche saw this process as a strategy of the weak to subjugate the strong, an inversion of values that transformed strength into sin and weakness into virtue. As he stated, the weakest move to undermine the strongest with their morality, dragging them down to their level. Nietzsche rejected the duality between good and evil, replacing it with the tension between power and weakness. In nature, predators do not feel guilty about their strength, nor do they need to justify it. Natural selection does not reward kindness, but the ability to assert oneself and survive. In human society, the logic is the same. Those who understand and exercise power prosper, not those who reject it. He called Superman the individual who transcends current morality and creates his own values instead of passively accepting those imposed on him. In contrast, those who blindly cling to traditional morality, believing that justice and virtue will bring them security, were described by Nietzsche as the last men. These individuals give up ambition and power in exchange for comfort and predictability. They don't seek greatness. They don't challenge limits. They just accommodate themselves to mediocrity and disguise their inertia as if it were a virtue. Nietzsche satirized them. What is love? What is desire? What is a star? Zrenya asks the last man and blinks. They prefer security to freedom. They avoid confrontation, believing that morality will protect them. But power does not belong to those who play fair, but to those who understand and master its rules. In the corporate world, it is not the kindest people who lead, but those who know how to impose their presence. In politics, it is not the most honest who wins, but whoever controls public perception wins. The dilemma becomes even more profound when the weak not only accept their servitude, but desire it. They don't just tolerate oppression, they legitimize it. They venerate their tormentors and choose submission to avoid the chaos of freedom. The greatest tragedy is not that the strong command, but that the weak surrender their autonomy willingly. History repeats itself because men follow corrupt leaders, adhere to ideologies without reflection, and allow third parties to dictate the rules. Although they claim to act out of morality, many actually evade responsibility for their own power. Nietzsche argued that most people are mistaken about virtue. They do not follow it out of principle, but because they fear the weight of freedom. And this is why so many people reject Nietzsche's ideas. Accepting them means recognizing that there is no divine justice, that there is no protective moral network, that there are no guarantees of reward. Accepting this reality is facing uncertainty without absolute certainty. But Nietzsche did not write for those seeking comfort. He wrote for anyone who is willing to face the truth. You still need to have chaos inside you to give birth to a dancing star. If morality is an invention and justice a myth, what prevents the ruthless from exercising absolute dominance? If the world belongs to the strong, what place is left for the weak? This dilemma paralyzes many, as it reveals a deep fear that power corrupts. However, Nietzsche did not see power as a problem in itself, but as a neutral force. Its value depends on how it is used. Superman does not seek the power to destroy, but to create. His dominance is not born of cruelty, but of the understanding that to reject power is to reject life itself. The point is not simply to abandon morality and act with ruthless ambition, but to transcend moralistic naivety and understand the true role of power. Strength and strategy are indispensable in a world that is not fair. It's not enough to be kind. You need to understand power structures, the dynamics of influence, and above all, create your own values instead of passively accepting social dogmas. These ideas will always sound elitist and uncomfortable to the majority, but Nietzsche never wrote for the masses. Our greatest knowledge must sound like madness, and sometimes like crime, when heard by those who are not prepared for it. Nietzsche was deeply committed to preserving the world as fertile ground for true human excellence. Therefore, he wrote only for the superior man, urging him to overcome the temptations of herd morality and to follow his own heroic path in life. However, he was not optimistic about the future of humanity. The persistence of herd morality should be a cause for concern, for beneath his mask of innocence and his calls for equality, the slave does not wish to elevate the world. He wishes to bring it down to his level. Driven by resentment and envy, he seeks social and political power, not to build, but to destroy, using it as compensation for his own impotence, mediocrity, and failures. As we learned from Arthur Schopenhauer, in Love, Women, and Death, man, deep down, is a wild animal, a beast. We only know him domesticated, caged in that state we call civilization.